The fall from grace. The sun, a molten orb in the vast azure canvas above, beat down with an almost sentient intensity upon the jagged peaks of the Hajar Mountains. These ancient sentinels, their craggy faces etched by millennia of wind and time, cast long, skeletal shadows that stretched like phantom limbs across the undulating ochre sands of the Arabian Desert. The air, still and heavy, hummed with the silent energy of the land, a land both breathtakingly beautiful and brutally unforgiving. High above this dramatic tableau, a Saker falcon named Furry rode the thermal currents with effortless grace. Her wings, broad and powerful, caught the invisible updrafts, allowing her to soar and glide with a mastery that spoke of generations of aerial dominance. Her eyes, the color of polished amber, scanned the landscape below with a keen focus, missing no subtle movement, no flicker of life in the seemingly barren expanse. She was a creature of the wind, a hunter born and bred, her existence defined by the boundless freedom of the skies. Today, however, a reckless impulse, a surge of youthful exuberance and the undeniable lure of a plump desert hare darting amongst the sparse vegetation, would lead to a moment of catastrophic miscalculation. The hare, its coat the exact shade of the sun-baked earth, was a fleeting shadow against the pale sand. Furry, her predatory instincts ignited, folded her wings and plunged into a breathtaking dive. The wind shrieked past her streamlined body as she hurtled towards her unsuspecting prey. She was a blur of motion, a feathered arrow aimed with deadly precision. The hare, sensing the sudden shift in the air, made a desperate dash for cover beneath a cluster of thorny acacia bushes. Furry adjusted her trajectory, her talons extended, ready to strike. It was in this final, crucial moment, as she angled sharply to follow the hare's erratic flight, that disaster struck. A sudden, unexpected gust of wind, swirling down from the higher peaks, buffeted her mid-dive. The force of it caught her off balance, throwing her slightly off course. In her intense focus on the fleeing prey, she failed to fully compensate. Her left wing, catching the brunt of the turbulent air, twisted awkwardly. A sharp, searing pain shot through her, a sensation so alien and shocking that it momentarily stunned her. The ground rushed up with terrifying speed. Furry instinctively tried to correct her descent, her right wing beating frantically, but the injured left wing hung limp and useless. The carefully orchestrated ballet of her flight dissolved into a chaotic tumble. She slammed into the rocky ground with a sickening crunch, the impact jarring every bone in her body. For a moment, everything went black. Then, a wave of agonizing pain washed over her, bringing with it the horrifying realization of what had happened. Her left wing, her very means of survival, was broken. She lay there, stunned and disoriented, amidst the sharp, unforgiving rocks and the coarse sand. The world, once a boundless expanse viewed from dizzying heights, was now a confined and threatening space. The scent of dry earth and thorny vegetation filled her nostrils, a stark contrast to the clean, crisp air of the upper altitudes. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of pain. The desert, which had always been her domain, now felt like a vast, indifferent trap. The sun, no longer a source of warmth and energy, was now a relentless tormentor. The silence, once a comforting backdrop to her soaring flights, now amplified her vulnerability. She was grounded, exposed, and utterly alone. Hours crawled by, marked only by the slow, agonizing progress of the sun across the sky. Furry tried to move, to take flight, but the searing pain in her wing and the sickening weakness that gripped her body made any significant movement impossible. She could only huddle beneath the meager shade of the acacia bush, her once proud plumage now dusty and ruffled, her bright eyes clouded with pain and despair. The desert floor, usually a distant tapestry far below, now pressed against her, a rough and unforgiving reality. She could hear the scuttling of unseen creatures in the sand, the whisper of the wind carrying the scent of predators. Every rustle, every shadow, sent shivers of fear through her. The instinct to survive, so deeply ingrained, warred with the crushing weight of her helplessness. As the last rays of the setting sun painted the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep violet, a lone figure emerged from the shimmering heat haze in the distance. It was Omar, a Bedouin whose life was as intertwined with the desert as the ancient acacia roots that sought water deep beneath the sand. He was a man sculpted by solitude, his face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by the sun and wind, his eyes holding a quiet sadness that spoke of a life lived in both harmony and hardship with the harsh landscape. Omar was known among the scattered tribes of the region for his uncanny connection with the desert's wildlife. He possessed a patience and understanding that allowed him to observe and interact with creatures that often remained hidden from others. He moved with a quiet grace, his presence rarely disturbing the delicate balance of the desert ecosystem. On this particular evening, as he made his way back to his simple shelter after a long day of tending his small flock of goats, something caught his eye. A flicker of unusual color near the base of the jagged peaks, a disturbance in the otherwise uniform tones of sand and rock. His keen eyes, honed by years of scanning the horizon, focused on the spot. He approached cautiously, his sandaled feet making little sound on the soft earth. As he drew closer, he saw the unmistakable form of a saker falcon, its magnificent wings folded at an unnatural angle. He recognized the species, admired for its speed and courage, a creature rarely seen so close to the ground. He drew nearer still, his heart sinking slightly at the sight of the bird's distress. He could see the labored breathing, the dullness in its usually bright eyes. He knelt slowly, his presence radiating a quiet calm. He could sense the fear emanating from the injured creature, the primal instinct to flee even in its weakened state. Omar observed the twisted wing, the ruffled feathers, the overall posture of pain and vulnerability. He understood the gravity of the situation. A falcon grounded in the desert was a falcon facing certain death. Predators, dehydration, starvation, any one of these could claim her swiftly. He remained there for a long moment, simply observing, his gaze gentle and assessing. He made no sudden movements, offered no immediate comfort. There was a deep understanding within him, a respect for the wildness of the creature before him. He knew that any attempt to force his help upon her in her current state would likely only exacerbate her fear and stress. Instead, he made a decision that was characteristic of his quiet wisdom. He would offer her a chance, a sanctuary, but on her own terms. He would not confine her, would not force his touch upon her. He would simply provide the essential elements for survival and allow her own resilience to guide her healing. With a slow, deliberate movement, Omar cleared the immediate area around Farah, removing any sharp rocks or potentially irritating debris. He then retrieved a small, shallow clay dish from his pouch and poured a trickle of precious water into it. He placed the dish a short distance from the injured falcon. Finally, he took a piece of the lean gazelle meat he had carried with him for his own evening meal and placed it near the water, a silent offering. Having done what he could without intruding upon her space, Omar retreated to his simple shelter, a rough tent woven from goat hair, a short distance away. He settled by his small fire, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on his weathered face. He kept his gaze fixed on the injured falcon, a silent vigil beginning under the watchful eyes of the emerging stars. He knew the odds were stacked against her, but something in the proud set of her beak, even in her pain, sparked a flicker of hope within him. He would give her a chance to live, a shadow of refuge. A silent pact, the desert night descended, a cloak of deep indigo studded with the brilliant, unwavering light of 1,000 stars. The air cooled rapidly, a welcome respite from the day's relentless heat. Omar sat by his small fire, the crackling flames casting an orange glow on his face, his gaze occasionally drifting towards the small, still form huddled beneath the acacia bush. Farah remained there, a dark silhouette against the pale sand, her breathing shallow and uneven. The sounds of the night began to emerge, the soft rustling of unseen creatures in the sand, the distant howl of a desert fox, the whisper of the wind as it snaked through the dunes. Each sound was a potential threat to the vulnerable falcon, a stark reminder of her precarious situation. Yet, within the small circle of Omar's presence, there was a sense of quiet watchfulness, a silent promise of safety. As the first rays of dawn painted the eastern horizon in hues of soft pink and gold, Omar stirred. He had slept little, his senses attuned to the rhythms of the desert, his concern for the injured creature a constant undercurrent in his thoughts. He rose slowly, his movements fluid and economical, and went about the simple rituals of his morning: a small cup of strong, bitter coffee, a silent prayer offered to the vastness of the sky. He then turned his attention to Farah. She was still in the same spot, but as the light grew stronger, he could see her more clearly. Her feathers were still ruffled, her posture still hunched with pain, but there was a subtle difference. Her eyes, though still clouded, held a flicker of alertness, and she had shifted slightly, indicating a small measure of renewed strength. The water in the dish he had left was slightly lower, and the piece of gazelle meat had been partially eaten. A small sign of life, a tiny spark of resilience in the face of adversity. Omar maintained his distance. He refilled the water dish and placed another small piece of meat nearby, then resumed his usual morning routine, allowing Farah to observe him without feeling threatened. He understood that trust, especially with a wild creature, was a fragile thing, easily broken by impatience or intrusion. He would earn it slowly, through consistent, unobtrusive care. Days continued in this silent rhythm. The sun rose and fell, casting its ever-shifting patterns of light and shadow across the desert. Omar went about his tasks, tending his goats, gathering sparse vegetation for their feed, maintaining his simple shelter, all the while keeping a watchful eye on Farah. He never approached her directly, never tried to touch her or confine her. His presence was a constant, a silent reassurance in her vulnerable state. Farah, in turn, began to adapt to this strange, unexpected sanctuary. The constant threat of predators lessened in the vicinity of the human camp. The regular provision of food and water eased the gnawing pangs of hunger and thirst. She began to associate Omar's presence not with danger, but with a sense of safety and sustenance. She would watch him as he moved around his camp, his quiet efficiency, the gentle way he interacted with his goats. There was a stillness about him, a deep connection to the land, that resonated with her own innate understanding of the desert's rhythms. She sensed his sadness too, the quiet melancholy that seemed to cling to him like the desert dust. It was a feeling that, in her own way, she could understand: the ache of loss, the vulnerability of being alone. Slowly, painstakingly, Farah began her own healing process. She would cautiously stretch her injured wing, the movement sending jolts of pain through her body. But with each passing day, the stretches became a little wider, the pain a little less intense. She would preen her feathers, meticulously smoothing the ruffled plumage, a small act of reclaiming her former dignity. Omar observed these small victories from afar, a quiet satisfaction growing within him. He had offered her a lifeline, and her own fierce spirit was clinging to it. He had not interfered with her wildness, had not tried to tame her, and in return, she was beginning to accept his presence, to view him not as a captor, but as a silent benefactor. One particularly hot afternoon, as Omar sat in the shade of his tent mending a piece of leather, Farah hopped a little closer than usual. She remained a cautious distance away, her bright eyes fixed on him, but the space between them had narrowed. It was a small gesture, but for Omar, it felt significant. A tiny crack in the wall of fear that separated the wild creature from the solitary man. He continued his work, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her no reason to feel threatened. After a while, Farah took another tentative hop, closing the distance even further. She then settled down in the shade a few feet away from him, her breathing still a little ragged, but her posture more relaxed than he had seen before. For the rest of the afternoon, they remained there, the man and the bird, separated by a small patch of sand, united by a silent understanding. Omar continued his work, the rhythmic stitching a quiet counterpoint to the stillness of the desert. Farah rested, absorbing the shade, the proximity to the quiet human offering a sense of unexpected security. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in fiery hues once more, Farah stirred. She hopped towards the water dish, drank deeply, and then looked at Omar. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. There was no fear in her gaze now, only a quiet acknowledgement. She then hopped towards the remaining piece of meat and began to eat. Omar watched her, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He had not sought her companionship, had not expected her gratitude. He had simply acted out of an innate compassion, a respect for the delicate balance of life in the desert. And in return, this wild creature was offering him a silent pact, a fragile bridge built on trust and mutual respect. He knew that this fragile truce was temporary. He could see the growing strength in her movements, the increasing alertness in her eyes. The day would come when her wing would be fully healed, and the call of the open sky would be too strong to resist. He did not delude himself into thinking she would stay. He had learned long ago that holding on to something too tightly only led to pain. But for now, in the quiet solitude of the desert, there was a connection, a silent understanding between the shadow on the sand and the wind in his heart. A wounded falcon finding sanctuary in the presence of a solitary man, both bearing the scars of their own battles, finding a measure of solace in the whispers of recovery. Days bled into weeks under the relentless gaze of the desert sun. The silent pact between Omar and Farah deepened, an unspoken understanding woven into the fabric of their shared existence. Omar continued his quiet routine, his presence a constant source of safety and sustenance for the recovering falcon. Farah, in turn, grew visibly stronger, her movements more confident, the dullness in her amber eyes replaced by a growing spark of vitality. Her injured wing, once a source of agonizing pain and crippling helplessness, was slowly but surely mending. She would exercise it more frequently now, stretching it out in the warm air, testing its flexibility. The initial twinges of pain gradually subsided, replaced by a growing sense of strength and control. Feathers that had been broken and ruffled were being replaced by new, sleek plumage, restoring her to her former glory. Omar watched this transformation with a quiet satisfaction. He had not interfered, had not rushed her healing, but had simply provided the space and resources for her own powerful instinct for survival to take hold. There was a profound respect in his observation, an understanding of the inherent resilience of nature. As Farah's physical strength returned, so too did her wild spirit. The docile acceptance of her grounded state began to give way to a growing restlessness. She would often perch on a nearby rock, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse of the sky, her head cocked as if listening to a distant call. Omar noticed these shifts, the subtle changes in her demeanor that spoke of an inner yearning. He knew this was a natural progression, the inevitable stirring of her wild heart. He had never expected her to become a permanent fixture in his solitary life. He had simply offered a temporary haven, a pause in her wild journey. The thought of her eventual departure brought a familiar pang of loneliness, a faint echo of past losses, but it was tempered by a sense of fulfillment in having aided her recovery. One morning, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Farah engaged in a more vigorous exercise than usual. She flapped her wings with increasing power, the strong beats creating small gusts of wind that ruffled Omar's hair as he sat nearby, mending a tear in his tent. He watched her, his eyes thoughtful, recognizing the growing urgency in her movements. Later that day, Farah took her first tentative flight. It was a short, clumsy affair, her injured wing still not at full strength, but it was a momentous occasion nonetheless. She lifted herself a few feet off the ground, hovered for a brief moment, and then landed awkwardly. A triumphant cry, weak but filled with exhilaration, escaped her beak. Omar looked up from his work, a rare smile gracing his lips. He understood the significance of that short flight, the reclaiming of a part of herself that had been lost. He continued his mending, allowing Farah to explore her returning ability in her own time, without any pressure or expectation from him. Over the next few days, Farah's flights became longer and more confident. She would circle his camp, her powerful wings beating the air, her shadow passing over him like a fleeting reminder of the wildness he had sheltered. Sometimes, she would land nearby, accepting the offering of food, but her stays were becoming shorter. her gaze more frequently drawn to the open sky. The other creatures of the desert, who had cautiously kept their distance during Farah's grounded period, began to reappear. A desert fox would occasionally skirt the edges of the camp, its curious eyes watching the falcon's aerial displays. A pair of sand grouse would land briefly near the water source, their soft cooing a new addition to the desert symphony. The delicate balance of the ecosystem was slowly reasserting itself. Omar observed these interactions with a sense of quiet understanding. Farah was reintegrating into her natural world, her connection to him a temporary interlude in her wild existence. He knew that the time of her departure was drawing near. One evening, as the sky was ablaze with the colors of sunset, Farah landed on a high rock overlooking Omar's camp. She preened her feathers meticulously, her movements fluid and graceful, a picture of health and vitality. She then looked down at Omar, who sat by his fire, the flickering flames illuminating his face. For a long moment, their eyes met. There was no fear, no dependence in Farah's gaze, only a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they had shared, a silent understanding of the journey they had taken together. It was a look that spoke of respect, of a connection forged not through captivity or training, but through mutual trust and a shared experience of vulnerability and healing. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand, Farah spread her magnificent wings. She paused for a heartbeat, silhouetted against the twilight sky, and then launched herself into the air. She circled once above Omar's camp, a powerful cry echoing through the stillness, a cry that sounded not of farewell, but of freedom regained. Omar watched her until she was just a dark speck against the darkening sky, his heart filled with a bittersweet emotion. He felt the familiar pang of loneliness, the echo of past goodbyes, but it was different this time. There was a sense of completion, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had played a part in her recovery, in allowing her to reclaim her rightful place in the sky. He knew she would not return. Her wild heart belonged to the wind and the open expanse. But the memory of her presence, the silent pact they had forged in the solitude of the desert, would remain with him, a testament to the unexpected connections that could bloom even in the harshest of landscapes. The shadow on the sand had taken flight, leaving behind a quiet warmth in the wind that echoes in the silence. The days that followed Farah's departure settled into a familiar rhythm for Omar, a rhythm that had been temporarily disrupted by the falcon's presence. The desert, once filled with the subtle sounds of her recovery, the soft rustle of her feathers, the tentative beats of her wings, now echoed with its usual profound silence. Yet, the silence felt different now, imbued with a quiet memory, a lingering warmth. Omar went about his tasks, tending his goats, his movements as economical and unhurried as ever. But there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. The deep-seated sadness that had clung to him seemed to have lifted slightly, replaced by a quiet serenity. The memory of Farah, the vibrant spark of life he had helped to nurture, had left an unexpected trace of hope in his solitary existence. He would often find himself gazing up at the vast expanse of the sky, his eyes searching for a familiar silhouette against the blue. He knew it was unlikely he would ever see her again, that her path now lay far beyond the confines of his small encampment. Yet, the act of looking, the silent acknowledgement of her freedom, brought him a sense of peace. The other creatures of the desert seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere. The desert fox, bolder now, would occasionally venture closer to his camp, its curious gaze no longer fixed on a recovering predator. The sand grouse, their soft cooing a familiar sound, would land more frequently near his water source. The delicate balance of the desert, momentarily tilted by Farah's vulnerability, had found its equilibrium once more. One particularly still morning, as the sun painted the dunes in hues of soft gold, Omar was tracking a stray goat when he came across a single, perfectly formed Saker falcon feather lying on the sand. It was a feather the color of warm honey, with delicate dark markings. He recognized it instantly. It was one of Farah's. He knelt and gently picked it up, turning it over in his calloused fingers. It was a tangible reminder of her presence, a whisper of the wild spirit he had sheltered. He held it for a long moment, a faint smile touching his lips, then carefully tucked it into a small leather pouch he carried, a repository of found treasures from the desert. Life continued its unhurried pace. The seasons turned, marked by subtle shifts in the intensity of the sun and the direction of the wind. The sparse desert vegetation bloomed briefly after the rare rains, painting the landscape in fleeting hues of green and purple before surrendering once more to the arid conditions. Omar remained a solitary figure, his connection to the desert and its creatures his primary companionship. But the memory of Farah had subtly altered his solitude, adding a layer of quiet reflection, a sense of having participated in the intricate dance of life and recovery. He never spoke of the falcon to the other Bedouin who occasionally passed through the area. It was a personal memory, a silent understanding between him and the vast desert. He knew that words could not truly capture the essence of their brief, unusual connection. One evening, as he sat by his fire, the stars beginning to prick the darkening sky, he thought of the stories the Bedouin told around their campfires. Tales of loyalty, of unexpected kindness, of the bonds that could form between humans and animals. He realized that his encounter with Farah, though unique in its silent nature and its eventual parting, held a similar thread of connection, a testament to the universal language of compassion and respect. He had not sought to tame her, to possess her. He had simply offered a sanctuary, a space for healing. And in return, she had offered him a glimpse of her wild spirit, a fleeting moment of connection that had subtly enriched his solitary existence. As the years passed, the memory of Farah remained, a quiet echo in the silence of the desert. The feather in his pouch, worn smooth by time and touch, served as a tangible reminder of the shadow on the sand that had once found refuge in his care and had then soared back into the wind, leaving behind a warmth in his heart that the desert sun could never fully erase. His solitude was no longer just an absence of human companionship, but a space filled with the quiet whispers of the wild, a testament to the enduring power of a lingering shadow, a distant cry. Years continued their silent march across the Arabian Desert, each sunrise painting the familiar landscape in new hues, each sunset casting long, melancholic shadows. For Omar, life settled into a deep and abiding rhythm, dictated by the ancient cycles of the sun, the moon, and the shifting sands. The memory of Farah, the sacred falcon he had sheltered, remained a vivid and cherished recollection, a quiet warmth that permeated his solitary existence. He still carried the feather, smooth and worn now from years of being touched and contemplated, tucked safely within his leather pouch. It was a tangible link to a wild spirit, a reminder of a brief but profound connection forged in the heart of the desert. Sometimes, when the wind carried a particularly sharp, piercing cry from high above, Omar would pause his work, his gaze lifting instinctively to the vast expanse of the sky. He would never know for certain if it was Farah, soaring in her boundless freedom, but the possibility always brought a faint smile to his lips. The desert itself seemed to hold echoes of her presence. In the sharp cry of a passing raptor, in the swift shadow that momentarily darkened the sand, in the untamed spirit of the wind that swept across the dunes, Omar would find fleeting reminders of the magnificent falcon he had once known. Life in the desert was a constant dance between survival and serenity. Omar was a master of this delicate balance, his knowledge of the land and its creatures profound. He knew where to find the scarce water sources, how to navigate by the stars, and how to read the subtle signs of the changing weather. His goats provided him with sustenance and companionship, their gentle bleating a familiar counterpoint to the desert's silence. Yet, despite his deep connection to the natural world, Omar remained a solitary figure. The loss he had experienced years ago had left an indelible mark, a reluctance to form deep attachments. His encounter with Farah had been an unexpected interlude, a reminder that even in solitude, kindness and connection were possible, albeit sometimes fleeting. One particularly harsh summer, a prolonged drought gripped the region. The sparse vegetation withered, water sources dwindled, and a sense of hardship settled over the land. Even the desert creatures seemed subdued, their movements sluggish in the oppressive heat. Omar, with his deep understanding of the desert's resilience, knew how to conserve his resources and find the last remaining pockets of water. During this difficult time, he noticed a change in the behavior of some of the local wildlife. Animals that usually kept their distance seemed drawn to his small encampment, perhaps sensing the presence of water or the quiet reassurance of his familiar presence. A family of desert foxes would linger near his tent at night, their eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. A lone gazelle, its ribs showing through its thin coat, would cautiously approach his water trough. Omar, true to his nature, offered what he could spare, sharing his meager resources with the struggling creatures. He understood the interconnectedness of life in the desert, the shared vulnerability in times of hardship. He did not seek their affection or expect their gratitude, but simply acted out of an innate sense of compassion. One sweltering afternoon, as Omar rested in the shade of his tent, he heard a faint, distressed cry. It was a familiar sound, sharp and piercing, but tinged with an unusual note of urgency. He listened intently, his senses immediately alert. The cry seemed to be coming from the direction of the jagged peaks of the Hajar Mountains, the same area where he had first found Farah. A wave of unease washed over him. Could it be? It was unlikely, after so many years. And yet, the familiarity of the cry stirred a deep and instinctive concern within him. He knew the dangers of the mountains. The treacherous terrain, the scarcity of resources, the possibility of injury. He hesitated for a moment, the ingrained habit of solitude warring with a sudden, compelling urge to investigate. The memory of Farah, helpless and injured, flashed through his mind. He thought of the fragile bond they had shared, the silent trust that had grown between them. Against his usual inclination, Omar decided to follow the sound. He gathered some water and a few provisions, his movements quick and decisive. He knew the journey to the higher peaks would be arduous, especially in the heat of the day, but the insistent cry echoed in his heart, a whisper of a connection that time had not fully erased. He set off towards the mountains, his weathered face set with a determined resolve. The familiar landscape seemed different now, imbued with a sense of urgency, a feeling that the silent desert was trying to communicate something. The lingering shadow of the past, the distant cry in the present, had stirred something deep within the solitary heart of Omar, drawing him out of his self-imposed isolation and back towards the wild, unpredictable beauty of the ascent and the echo of pain. The journey towards the Hajar Mountains was a test of Omar's endurance, his aging body navigating the rugged terrain under the relentless assault of the desert sun. The familiar paths he usually traversed with a quiet ease now felt more demanding, each rocky incline and sandy stretch requiring a greater expenditure of energy. Yet, the insistent cry, faint but persistent on the dry desert air, spurred him onward. As he drew closer to the foothills, the landscape began to change. The rolling dunes gave way to rocky outcrops and steep, winding trails. Sparse vegetation clung precariously to the mountainsides, their leaves withered and brittle from the prolonged drought. The air grew thinner, and the heat seemed to intensify, radiating off the sun-baked stone. The distressed cry became more distinct as Omar ascended, its urgency cutting through the otherwise silent grandeur of the mountains. It was undeniably the cry of a Saker falcon, and the note of pain and desperation in it tugged at a deep chord within him. The memory of finding Farah, broken and helpless, beneath these very peaks years ago, was vivid in his mind. He climbed steadily, his movements slow but deliberate, his eyes scanning the rocky slopes for any sign of the injured bird. The terrain was treacherous, loose scree shifting underfoot, sharp rocks jutting out unexpectedly. He relied on his years of experience in the mountains, his innate understanding of the safest paths. Hours passed in this arduous ascent. The sun began its slow descent towards the western horizon, painting the jagged peaks in hues of fiery orange and deep purple. The shadows lengthened, offering a brief respite from the intense heat, but also making the search more challenging. Just as he was beginning to feel a gnawing sense of doubt, a flicker of movement high above caught his eye. a dark shape against the darkening rock face, an unnatural stillness in its posture. He squinted, his heart quickening with a sudden surge of hope and apprehension. He changed direction, his path now leading him towards a steep, rocky ledge. The climb was precarious, requiring him to use his hands to grip the rough stone, his body pressed close to the mountainside. The distressed cries were louder now, confirming that he was getting closer. Finally, after a strenuous climb, he reached the ledge. There, huddled in a small hollow, was a saker falcon. His heart sank. It was not Farah. This bird was larger, its plumage a slightly different shade. But the sight of its obvious distress mirrored the memory he carried so vividly. The falcon's wing was caught in a narrow crevice between two rocks, the frantic struggle to free itself only wedging it tighter. The bird was panting heavily, its eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Its cries were weak and hoarse, a desperate plea for help. Omar approached cautiously, speaking in soft, soothing Arabic words. The falcon, initially frantic, seemed to sense the calm in his voice and stilled slightly. Omar could see the raw, exposed bone where the wing was trapped, the feathers around it stained with blood. He assessed the situation quickly. The crevice was narrow and the rocks were sharp. Any forceful attempt to pull the wing free would likely cause further injury. He needed to find a way to gently widen the opening or carefully maneuver the wing out. He examined the surrounding rocks, searching for a loose stone or a wedge that might help. The light was fading fast, and the air was growing cooler. He knew he had to act quickly. After a few moments of careful searching, he found a flat, sturdy rock nearby. Using another smaller stone as a hammer, he began to gently tap at the rocks around the trapped wing, trying to dislodge any small fragments that might be contributing to the obstruction. The process was slow and painstaking, requiring immense patience and a delicate touch. The injured falcon remained relatively still, seemingly understanding that Omar was trying to help. Each small chip of rock that broke away offered a tiny sliver of hope. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Omar managed to widen the crevice just enough. With infinite care, he gently guided the trapped wing, inch by agonizing inch, until it was free. The falcon lay there for a moment, exhausted and trembling, its injured wing hanging limp. Omar examined it as best he could in the fading light. The bone was likely broken, a clean snap, but the bleeding had slowed. He knew he couldn't leave the bird here. Predators would be drawn by the scent of blood, and the cold mountain night would be unforgiving. With a gentle touch, he carefully lifted the injured falcon, cradling it in his arms. The bird was surprisingly light, its body tense with pain and fear. Omar spoke to it softly, his voice a low murmur of comfort. He began the slow and careful descent back down the mountain, the injured falcon held securely against his chest. The echo of pain in the falcon's cries resonated with the memory of Farah, a reminder of the vulnerability of even the most magnificent creatures in the face of the harsh desert landscape. His solitary journey had taken an unexpected turn, drawing him once again into the role of the weight of vulnerability, the balm of gentle hands. The descent from the Hajar Mountains with the injured falcon cradled in his arms was slow and arduous for Omar. The fading light cast long, distorted shadows, making the already treacherous terrain even more challenging. Each step had to be taken with utmost care, mindful of both his own footing and the fragile life he held against his chest. The injured falcon remained relatively still, its breathing shallow and rapid. Occasionally, a soft whimper of pain would escape its beak, a poignant reminder of its suffering. Omar would respond with gentle murmurs, his touch as light as a desert breeze, trying to offer what little comfort he could. As he finally reached the relative safety of the foothills and the familiar expanse of the sandy plains, the moon had begun its ascent, casting a silvery glow over the landscape. The air was cooler now, a welcome change from the heat of the day, but the vast silence of the desert felt heavier, imbued with the weight of the vulnerable creature in his care. He made his way back to his small encampment, the flickering light of his fire a beacon in the darkness. He carefully laid the injured falcon on a soft piece of cloth inside his tent, his movements slow and deliberate, mindful of causing further pain. In the dim light of his lantern, he examined the injured wing more closely. The break was clean, as he had suspected, but there was some swelling and bruising around the wound. He knew he didn't possess the knowledge or the tools to mend it properly, but he could offer comfort and prevent infection. He gently cleaned the wound with water from his precious reserves, his touch as light as a feather. He then fashioned a makeshift splint from thin strips of wood and soft cloth, carefully immobilizing the broken wing. The falcon remained surprisingly still throughout the process, its eyes fixed on Omar with a mixture of fear and a dawning sense of trust. Over the next few days, Omar dedicated himself to caring for the injured falcon. He provided it with fresh water and small pieces of tender meat, coaxing it to eat with soft words and gentle encouragement. He kept it sheltered from the harsh sun and the cold nights, his small tent now a temporary sanctuary for the wounded creature. He observed the falcon closely, noting its breathing, its alertness, its appetite. Slowly, gradually, he began to see signs of improvement. The swelling around the wing decreased, the falcon became more responsive, and its whimpers of pain became less frequent. The presence of the injured bird brought a new dimension to Omar's solitary life. His days were no longer solely focused on the quiet routines of survival but were now punctuated by the needs of the vulnerable creature in his care. He found himself constantly attuned to its subtle cues, anticipating its needs, offering comfort and reassurance. He never tried to confine the falcon more than necessary, allowing it to move freely within the confines of his tent. He would often sit quietly beside it, mending his tools or preparing his meals, his presence a silent reassurance. The other desert creatures seemed to sense the unusual presence in Omar's camp. The desert foxes would approach the tent cautiously, their curious eyes peering inside. The sand grouse would land nearby, their soft cooing a gentle melody in the quiet desert. But they kept their distance, respecting the fragile state of the injured falcon. As the days passed, a subtle bond began to form between the solitary man and the wounded bird. The falcon, initially fearful and distrustful, began to recognize Omar's gentle touch and the soothing tone of his voice. It would sometimes allow him to stroke its uninjured feathers, its body relaxing slightly under his touch. Omar, in turn, found a quiet sense of purpose in caring for the helpless creature. It was a reminder of the interconnectedness of life, the shared vulnerability that transcended species. The act of nurturing the injured falcon brought a sense of warmth to his solitary heart, a faint echo of the connection he had felt with Farah. He knew that this connection, like the previous one, was likely temporary. He could see the growing strength in the falcon's eyes, the increasing restlessness in its movements. The instinct to fly, the deep-seated yearning for the open sky, would eventually reassert itself. But for now, in the quiet solitude of his desert camp, there was a shared vulnerability, a silent understanding between the man who had offered refuge and the wild creature who had accepted it. The weight of vulnerability was being slowly lifted by the balm of gentle hands and the quiet resilience. The stirring of wings, the echo of freedom. Weeks turned into a quiet testament to the resilience of life and the unexpected bonds that could form in the solitude of the desert. The injured falcon, under Omar's patient and gentle care, made remarkable progress. The broken wing healed steadily, the makeshift splint becoming a symbol of recovery rather than injury. The swelling subsided completely, and the falcon began to test its wing with increasing confidence, stretching it out and flapping it within the confines of the tent. Omar watched this progress with a familiar sense of quiet satisfaction. He recognized the growing restlessness in the falcon's amber eyes, the increasing frequency of its wing exercises. The wild spirit, temporarily subdued by injury and vulnerability, was beginning to reassert itself, yearning for the boundless freedom of the skies. He knew the time of departure was drawing near. The falcon, once a helpless creature in his care, was regaining its strength and its innate desire to return to its natural element. He felt a familiar pang of bittersweet emotion, a sense of impending loss mingled with the joy of witnessing a life reclaimed. One cool morning, as the first rays of dawn filtered through the opening of his tent, Omar found the falcon perched near the entrance, its gaze fixed on the brightening horizon. It stretched its wings fully, the powerful span casting a large shadow on the sandy floor. Then, with a series of strong, confident beats, it lifted itself into the air within the tent, circling once before landing gracefully near Omar. It looked at him, its amber eyes bright and alert, with a gaze that seemed to convey a silent acknowledgement, a wordless expression of trust and perhaps even a hint of gratitude. Omar understood. The time had come. He carefully opened the tent wider, allowing the full light of the morning sun to flood the interior. The falcon hopped towards the opening, its body tense with anticipation. It paused for a moment on the threshold, its head cocked as if taking in the vastness of the sky. Then, with a powerful thrust of its wings, it launched itself into the air. It circled Omar's camp once, its strong, healthy wings beating the air with effortless grace, its sharp cry echoing through the stillness of the desert. It was a cry of freedom, of life renewed, a triumphant return to its rightful domain. Omar watched it soar higher and higher, a dark silhouette against the azure sky, until it was just a speck in the distance. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, the echo of past goodbyes. But this time, it was different. There was a profound sense of completion, a quiet joy in having witnessed this magnificent creature reclaim its wildness. He returned to his tent, the space feeling strangely empty yet filled with the lingering memory of the falcon's presence. He picked up a small, downy feather that had been left behind, a final tangible reminder of their brief but meaningful connection. He added it to the worn feather from Farah in his leather pouch, two silent testaments to the unexpected bonds that had touched his solitary life. Life in the desert resumed its familiar rhythm, but Omar was subtly changed. The act of caring for the injured falcon had stirred something within him, a renewed connection to the wild beauty of the land and its creatures. The silence of the desert no longer felt quite so heavy, now imbued with the echoes of wings and the distant cries of freedom. He continued his solitary existence, his days marked by the simple routines of survival. But there was a lightness in his step, a quiet serenity in his eyes. He had offered refuge and healing, not once, but twice, to creatures of the sky, and in doing so, he had found a measure of solace and connection in the vast emptiness of the desert. The stirring of wings had left an enduring echo of freedom, whispers on the wind, seeds of connection. The years continued to unfold like the endless expanse of the Arabian Desert, each season bringing subtle shifts in the landscape and the rhythm of life. Omar, his hair now streaked with more silver than before, remained a steadfast figure in this timeless realm. The memories of Farah and the second falcon, the weight of their vulnerability and the triumph of their regained freedom, had become quiet anchors in his solitary existence. The two feathers in his pouch, worn smooth by time and touch, were constant reminders of these unexpected connections. He found himself more attuned than ever to the subtle language of the desert. The rustling of unseen creatures, the changing patterns of the wind, the distant calls of birds of prey circling high above. There was a sense of interconnectedness that had deepened within him, a profound understanding of the delicate balance of life in this seemingly harsh environment. One spring, after a rare and generous rainfall, the desert bloomed with a fleeting burst of color. Wildflowers carpeted the usually barren sand in vibrant hues of purple, yellow, and red. The air was alive with the buzzing of insects, and the normally sparse vegetation flourished with unexpected vigor. It was a time of renewal, a brief but beautiful reminder of the life that lay dormant beneath the surface. During this time of abundance, Omar encountered a young desert fox caught in a snare left carelessly by a passing hunter. The creature was small and terrified, its leg caught tightly in the cruel wire. Its whimpers of pain echoed through the usually silent landscape. Without hesitation, Omar approached the trapped animal cautiously, speaking in soft, soothing tones. He carefully worked at the snare, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as he tried to loosen the tight wire. It took time and patience, but finally, with a soft snap, the fox was free. The young fox, initially frantic, remained frozen for a moment, its eyes wide with fear. Omar made no sudden movements, simply offering it space and quiet reassurance. After a tentative moment, the fox licked its injured leg and then, with a swift movement, darted away into the blooming vegetation. Omar watched it go, a quiet sense of satisfaction warming his heart. He had offered help once again, not to a creature of the sky, but to one of the earth. The act of kindness, the simple gesture of alleviating suffering, brought a sense of connection to the vibrant life that had briefly flourished around him. These encounters, though infrequent, began to subtly shift Omar's solitude. While he remained a man of few words and a preference for his own company, there was a softening in his demeanor, a greater openness to the unexpected interactions that the desert occasionally offered. He started to notice small acts of trust from the local wildlife. A family of desert hares would sometimes graze closer to his camp, seemingly unperturbed by his presence. A pair of sand partridges would dust bathe near his water source, their soft cooing a familiar melody. It was as if the creatures of the desert sensed his quiet respect and his willingness to offer help when needed. One evening, as he sat by his fire, watching the stars begin to pepper the inky sky, he felt a gentle nudge against his hand. He looked down to see a small desert cat, its fur the color of the sand, rubbing against him. It was a creature he had seen occasionally in the distance but had never approached him before. He remained still, allowing the cat to explore his presence. It purred softly, a gentle vibration against his skin. After a few moments, it curled up and settled down beside him, its warmth a comforting presence in the cool desert night. For a long time, Omar simply sat there, the small desert cat nestled beside him, the vast silence of the desert punctuated by the crackling of the fire and the soft purring. It was an unexpected moment of companionship, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that could bloom even in the most solitary of lives. As the years continued their passage, Omar's small encampment became a subtle beacon in the vastness of the desert, a place where the wild creatures seemed to sense a quiet understanding and a potential for refuge. He remained a solitary figure, but his solitude was now interwoven with the threads of these unexpected connections, the whispers on the wind carrying the echoes of freedom and the quiet comfort of shared existence. The seeds of kindness he had sown had begun to blossom in the most unexpected ways, enriching the tapestry. A legacy of gentle hands, a call to connect. The final years of Omar's life were marked by a profound sense of peace, a quiet harmony with the desert that had been his constant companion. His small encampment, once a symbol of solitude, had subtly transformed into a sanctuary, a place where the wild creatures of the Arabian sands seemed to sense an unspoken understanding and a promise of gentle hands. The desert cat, Sarah, meaning desert in Arabic, remained his steadfast companion, a warm and comforting presence during the long, silent nights. Other creatures would come and go. A lame gazelle finding temporary respite near his water source, a flock of migrating birds seeking shelter during a sandstorm, a family of desert foxes raising their young in the quiet vicinity of his camp. Omar offered them what he could, a silent guardian of the delicate balance of life in his small corner of the vast wilderness. He often sat by his fire, Sarah curled contentedly in his lap, gazing up at the star-dusted sky. The memories of Farah and the second falcon remained vivid, their soaring flights a testament to the resilience of nature and the quiet satisfaction of having offered them a chance to heal and return to their wild freedom. The two feathers in his pouch, now softened with age and countless touches, felt like talismans, symbols of unexpected connection and the enduring power of compassion. The local Bedouin tribes, who occasionally encountered Omar on their travels, noticed the subtle changes in him. The deep sadness that had once shadowed his eyes had been replaced by a quiet serenity, a gentle understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things. They spoke of him with a mixture of respect and a touch of wonder, referring to him as the friend of the sands. One day, a young boy from a passing tribe, curious and unafraid, approached Omar's camp. He had heard the whispers of the old man who lived in harmony with the desert creatures. Omar, his face etched with the wisdom of years, welcomed the boy with a gentle smile. He showed him Sarah, purring softly in his lap, and pointed out the tracks of a desert fox near his tent. He didn't speak much, but his quiet presence and the peaceful atmosphere of his camp spoke volumes. As the boy prepared to leave, Omar reached into his leather pouch and carefully took out one of the falcon feathers. He placed it in the boy's hand, his gaze conveying a silent message of respect for the wild and the importance of kindness. In his final years, Omar's legacy was not one of grand pronouncements or heroic deeds, but of quiet compassion and a deep understanding of the natural world. He had lived a life of solitude, but it was a solitude enriched by unexpected connections, by the simple acts of offering refuge and healing. He had shown that even in the vast and seemingly indifferent expanse of the desert, kindness could bloom and create ripples of connection that touched both the wild and the human heart. And now, as this tale of the Arabian Desert draws to a close, we invite you, the readers from across the miles in the USA and the UK, to reflect on the threads of connection that bind us to the natural world. Like Omar, we have the capacity for compassion, the ability to offer a helping hand, or a safe space, to the creatures who share our planet. Consider the wildlife in your own communities, the birds that grace your skies, the animals that roam your landscapes. Take a moment to appreciate their beauty, their resilience, and their intrinsic value. Just as Omar offered refuge in the harsh desert, we too can find ways to protect and preserve the wildness that surrounds us, in our own backyards and in the vast wildernesses of the world. If Omar's story of unexpected connection has touched your heart, if you believe in the power of compassion and the importance of respecting the natural world, we encourage you to take action. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that explore the bonds between humans and animals, tales that celebrate the beauty and wonder of the natural world. Share this story with your friends and family, sparking conversations about our responsibility to the creatures who share our planet. Support organizations dedicated to wildlife conservation and animal welfare in your own communities and around the world. Every small act of kindness, every effort to protect and preserve, creates a ripple effect, contributing to a world where both humans and animals can thrive. Let the legacy of Omar, the friend of the sands, inspire us all to be more mindful, more compassionate, and more connected to the wild heart of our world. Just as a single feather can carry the echo of a soaring spirit, so too can our actions leave a lasting imprint of kindness on the delicate,